Presiding Officer, I would like to speak briefly about the overall level of resources available for housing and in more detail about the distribution of that money, with particular reference to Edinburgh. In welcoming Alec Neil to his first debate and to his new ministerial style, which has been highlighted by Ross Finney, I recognise, of course, the high level of resources he has been able to announce for housing this year, but clearly this is because of the money that has quite rightly been brought forward from next year's budget. So I do not think the Minister should get too carried away by that figure, or indeed some of the other figures he has been quoting recently in relation to approvals and completions. The downside of the money brought forward, which is the right thing to do, is that there will be a whole lot less money available for housing next year, and that is why it is so important that the Scottish Government does earmark the £45 million consequentials from the budget for housing, and I was disappointed the Minister did not do that in his opening speech, so I hope he is able to announce that in his wind-up. More generally, I believe that it is right to skew capital expenditure to housing, and we know we are going to be in harder public expenditure times. It is important, more important than ever, to pick the right priorities, and I think emphasising housing capital expenditure over other areas is very important for three reasons. Firstly, it is socially just and necessary, particularly now with many people losing their homes. Secondly, it is economically important, as the Minister himself highlighted. But thirdly, it is essential in relation to our achieving the historic 2012 homelessness target. And of the several important achievements in the Scottish Parliament years, and I am sure the SNP members will acknowledge that, I think internationally that homelessness target is the one that is most appreciated and recognised. So I think we should all realise the obligation we have to meet that commitment in 3 years' time. It is in the light of that target that I want to talk about the issue of distribution, because I believe that in the next 3 years in particular we need to skew the distribution of housing resources with the objective of achieving the 2012 homelessness target. And that means, firstly, that we will have an obligation, then all local authorities will have an obligation to house all unintentionally homeless people. So we need to make sure they have the resources to do that, each individual local authority. But secondly, we need to ensure that they can do that without having an excessively high percentage of new lets going to homeless people, because clearly many other people have a legitimate claim on council housing or other socially rented housing as well. Now, moving to Edinburgh, the heart of the matter is that Edinburgh cannot achieve that homelessness target, and that has been explicitly stated in its homelessness strategy and repeated at the Local Government and Communities Committee by Cathy King a few weeks ago. It cannot meet its homelessness target with its current level of resources, and I should also point out it is already allocating 2/3 of its lets to priority needs homeless people, and that is twice the national average. The simple reason for that is the chronic supply shortage within Edinburgh, by far the worst in Scotland, according to the analysis that was done for the Scottish Government by Bramley just a year or two ago. Another way of highlighting is that for every council house that becomes available in Edinburgh, 154 people seek it. And of course the result of that is that there are many disappointed people, and in particular, because of the emphasis that has to go on homelessness, thousands of people in Edinburgh cannot move out of their overcrowded homes. And of course there is a general problem of not enough large houses, which compounds that. Now, this is masked to some extent by a successful private sector leasing scheme in Edinburgh, but that being placed in a private sector leasing property does not meet the homelessness obligation, and of course there are other problems there in terms of high rents, meaning people cannot move into work, and somebody came and talked to me about that just at one of my surgeries last Saturday. Now, I have not got time. I have got 1 minute 40 seconds, so I need to conclude. This is not a new problem, I acknowledge that, and although housing resources to Edinburgh did increase in the latter years of the last administration, that was something that needed to be built on. Now, since then, we have had 1.8 million of the 40 million brought forward last year going to Edinburgh. We have had 1 million of the 25 million for council houses going to Edinburgh, and we have, I acknowledge, 5 million extra this year, plus money for land at Saughton brought forward from next year. And of course, there are concerns that that will be taken over off next year's budget. If the Minister can give us reassurance about that, then I would welcome that. I have actually got time for intervention from Mr McLeish.
I was just about... Sorry, thank you, Presiding Officer. I just want to point out to Mr Chisholm that the evidence given by Cathy King to the Local Government Committee was that the level of rents in the private sector let houses that the Council in Edinburgh has is not above the market level at all, and indeed is by and large in most instances covered by housing benefit levels. So the idea that this somehow or other prevents people getting proper housing is simply not true.
No, it doesn't stop them getting proper housing. It prevents many of them moving into well-paid work. That's the problem. But in conclusion, there is cross-party agreement in Edinburgh that Edinburgh needs substantial extra resources, and I know the leader of the SNP group and the Liberal Democratic group met Alec Neil to put that case recently. So I would make the case for a substantial amount of the £45 million to go into Edinburgh, and of course more next year. But more generally, I would make the plea in conclusion that the housing resources in general over the next 3 years should be distributed on the basis of supply shortages and with the objective of ensuring that every local authority in Edinburgh can meet its 2012 obligation.